Hello, Gus. We are live.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, welcome everyone who's on the speaker series webinar for tonight. Tonight we'll be presenting a speaker series, the first kickoff of our Eastvale 2040 plan speaker series with Chris Danley, and he will be speaking on mobility and health. My name is Gustavo Gonzalez. I am the new planning manager here with the city of Eastvale. But before I get into the program, I wanted to briefly bring up Gina Gibson-Williams, our development director, to say a few words. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Clear Vision speaker series for the City of Eastvale. This is our very first general plan and our very first speaker series. And so I say the first general plan, meaning it's the one that's Eastvale specific. And so you being here in the audience tonight is so vital to our future and so vital to our success. And so I just want to say, from about 30 years of working for government, thank you for taking the time out of your Thursday evening to be a part of this. This document, we want it to be something that doesn't come from the people who work in the city and is given to Eastvale. We want this document to be from Eastvale and have the Eastvale stamp and seal of approval on it. So thank you for joining us tonight. I also want to be able to introduce to you our planning manager, Gustavo Gonzalez. He is going to be the MC for this evening. And also the MC for the entire Clear Vision speaker series. So we have several experts in the field lined up to work with the team and work with the city of Eastvale in order to come up with a general plan that is great for us as a city and for our future. So I will turn over the meeting to Mr. Gustavo, and he will be your MC for the evening.
All right. Well, great. Thank you very much, Gina. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Gustavo Gonzalez. I am the new planning manager here for the city of Eastvale. A little bit about myself. I actually grew up in Eastvale. I'm an Eastvale native. I consider myself a dairy kid. I grew up on Chandler there. Was there since I was a baby until I went off to college. So I have seen Eastvale literally grow up and come up out of the ground around me. So this is an incredible opportunity for me to be a part of this growth and the future of Eastvale. So I'm just couldn't be more excited to be part of this team. So with that, let me go ahead and start our program. So I just wanted to go over quickly what our tonight's evening program has entailed for everyone. We're going to do welcome and introductions, and then we're going to get into just a little bit of an overview of what the Eastvale 2040 plan is. And then I'll turn it over to our featured guest speaker, Mr. Chris Danley, who will be talking about mobility and health. And then after his presentation, we will get into the Q&A and questions and discussion section where we encourage members of the audience to participate. We want this to be a lively discussion and a discussion that happens not just between staff and the guest speaker, but everyone who's attending. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. If you have a question, you can put it in there, or you can also just say you have a question, and then we'll go ahead and unmute you and you can speak. But please wait until we get to the question and discussion portion of the meeting. And then finally, we'll wrap up with just some next steps on where we are now and where we're going to be going with this whole program. So quick introductions. On the city side, we have our city manager, Brian Jones, in the audience. And then as well, we have Gina Gibson-Williams, who's our community development director. You heard from her already. You heard from me, Gus Gonzalez, planning manager. And then we also have Miguel Ramirez Cornejo, who is our management analyst and helping us behind the scenes to make sure everything runs smoothly. So you might hear his voice every once in a while, giving us instructions on things. And then we also have on the consultant side, we do have a team of consultants because we cannot pull this off by ourselves. We need a whole team, a whole army to really get this done. And so we have Susan Harden from Circle Point, who was our outreach consultant. We have Bob Stark from Michael Baker International and Natalie Smith, also from Michael Baker, who are our project managers. And then Mark Teague, who was a project manager from PlaceWorks. So before we get into what the general plan is all about, I wanted to focus first on the the guiding values and principles that we're going off of here to develop this program. In essence, we want to discover Eastvale's potential, capture Eastvale's imagination, represent your community, and shapes Eastvale's expectations. So what we're doing is, as we go through the whole program, as we go through tonight, as we go through, through the end of the program, we want to make sure we keep reflecting back on these values and that we're ensuring that we're capturing this in everything that we do. So these, again, are our guiding values, and we want to make sure that we're not straying away from these, because this is what we agreed upon when we kicked off this program back in spring. So real quick on what a general plan is. The Eastvale 2040 plan is an update to the city's general plan, often described as the constitution for a city's development. It is the foundation upon which all development decisions are based. So it brings the community together to develop a shared vision for the next 20 to 35 years, and it guides future actions by establishing priorities, policies, and goals. It sets the tone for the development of land and protection of people and resources. And in essence, we have to do this because we have to be in compliance with state law, which requires us to update our general plan every 10 years or so. Generally, general plans consist of elements or chapters, and those include the land use chapter, circulation, housing, noise, conservation, safety, open space, and environmental justice. Now we can add additional elements that really tailor to what our needs are and what the needs of the city are, in terms of if, for example, if we wanted to add a chapter or an element on diversity, we could. So we would have goals and policies that would address that, and any other priorities that we want to make in terms of diversity. So that's just one example. But in essence, it just, what the general plan really does, it sets us up for development of land uses throughout the city, and also protection of open space and protection of people. So as developers come in and come to us and say, hey, I want to develop something in the city, we turn to the general plan, and the general plan, tells us what is the best use of land throughout the city. So there's designations on all the properties throughout the city that tie into the general plan. And then as we develop our infrastructure, we also turn to the general plan. We turn to the circulation element and to the open space element for parks, just to ensure that our roadways and our open space and parks are being developed in the way we establish them in this plan. So it really does fit the constitution mode of the general plan. It's our Bible for development in the next 20 to 35 years. And what we're doing right now with the outreach is really setting the vision for it and setting the goals and policies. So you create the vision, and then from there come the goals and the policies, and we work with the community to come up with those, and then eventually those start to form into more standards and more actual development standards that are reflected in the zoning code. And so the zoning code really follows the general plan. So it really is establishing the long-term vision here, and really what we use to guide us every day as we do planning in the city of Eastvale and in any city that has a general plan. A little bit about our outreach so far. We do have our Engage Eastvale. We kicked the program off back in the spring, in March, just right before COVID hit. And we still were able to forge forward and get. I'm not saying we, but I wasn't here yet. But Gina and her team were able to forge forward and ensure that we didn't get too far off from our schedule in terms of getting the engagement piece done, because that's such a critical piece. That's what sets the vision, what sets the goals and the policies for us to develop the full general plan. And so if you go to Engage Eastvale, you can pull up and provide comments and chat with neighbors and give us your 2 cents on what you want to see. And in addition to that, we also did a community champions forum where we basically went out and interviewed leaders and people who are leading in our community, and interviewed them and really went into depth of what they want to see, really speaking for larger groups, and getting their input. And so we interviewed about 15 folks over the last several months. So we continue to do that and ensure that that is just one other piece of the outreach program. But in addition to that is this speaker series that we're doing now. So that's our third piece of it, and we're just kicking that off, and we're going to have 5 additional ones already scheduled, and in addition to that, we probably will have more. So we really spend a lot of time at the beginning doing the outreach, because again, we want to get the vision right, we want to get the goals and policies right before we move forward into putting any pen to paper and starting to actually draft the document and draft what is going to guide our development. So what we heard so far, these are some of the words that pop up as we do a search for things that are coming up more commonly with our outreach. And so folks want to see housing, they want to see mixed use, diversity, nightlife, entertainment, sustainability, greenery, development, trails, accessible, modern community, tight-knit community, and safety. Those are just some of the buzzwords that are starting to come up. And we'll go through a more robust process of ensuring that we reflect exactly what the community is telling us. But again, it's just a little bit of what we're starting to see from the input from the outreach that we've done so far. And then before we turn it over to Mark, I'm sorry, to Chris, I don't know what I called him, Mark, to Chris, I wanted to just kind of frame the rest of the evening by talking a little bit about mobility choices. So as we go through tonight, I just want people to keep in mind the notion of mobility choices as we go through the discussion tonight. The choice for all residents the choice for all residents and those that come to visit us to move freely throughout the city using different modes of transportation for different reasons, such as workshop or play, and without barriers. The choice for automobiles to move freely without gridlock. The choice for bicyclists and pedestrians to move in a pleasant setting without danger or the fear of danger. And the choice to find strategic areas throughout the city where all modes of mobility can coexist and thrive to the benefit of the surrounding community. So again, just keep that in mind as we're going through it. We're really talking about the wide spectrum of choices of mobility, everything from automobiles and ensuring that we don't end up with gridlock streets to providing trails and providing bikeways and finding areas of the city where we can merge all that together and really create a special place that really thrives and businesses around there really start to thrive because all those modes are coming together in those strategic locations that we're finding throughout the city. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris. I'm just going to briefly provide a bit of background on him based on his bio. So Chris Stanley is the founder of Vitruvian Planning and has worked in the planning profession since 2005. Having spent his youth in Southern California, including having lived right here in Eastvale, he's joined the U.S. Navy and spent 5 years in the naval aviation, traveling the world and experiencing numerous cultures and environments. Upon his honorable discharge, Chris came back to Southern California to earn his bachelor's degree in social sciences from Chapman University before moving to Washington State to earn a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Eastern Washington University. After graduating, Chris worked in both the public and private sector. Chris is a recognized national expert in health impact assessments. It's co-creator of a 2-day walk audit training academy known as the Looking Glass Academy, and has conducted planning and assessment projects throughout Idaho, North Carolina, Utah, and several other states. He is also a certified Safe Routes to School and League of American Bicyclists instructor, current board president of the National Physical Activity Society, former Boise, Idaho Planning and Zoning Commissioner, a former personal trainer, coach, and an avid runner and cyclist, and a dad to 2 young girls. Man, you are an incredible guy and do a lot. So I definitely want to learn more about Chris and can't wait to hear his presentation. So with that, please help me welcome Chris to the program. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and go ahead and get Chris on.
Okay. Leap of faith. Hopefully technology is working and everybody can see what is a black screen. Thank you for the introduction, Gus. I greatly appreciate it. I'm going to start this evening's conversation in a logical place when it comes to health and mobility. The moon. Why the moon? Well, from the dawn of time, humans have looked up at the night sky and have seen this, and will forever see this view of the moon. Well, scientists, astronomers for really centuries wondered and pondered, what does the other side of the moon look like? Multiple theories really sort of came about, but no one knew. And it wasn't until the USSR, the former Soviet Union, in 1959 sent up a satellite to the other side of the moon that we finally knew. And when they came back, this was the image that was shared around the world. And this image absolutely stunned all of the scientific community because this had no explanation. This side of the moon is completely different than the front side that we see every night. Later, a few years later, a probe was sent to the moon to explore this dark side. It was then discovered that the crust on the dark side of the moon is 30 miles thicker than the front side that we see every night. This again perplexed scientists, and nothing was explained. It wasn't until sometime later that the scientific world kind of sort of again came together and hypothesized what might have happened. To this day, the prevailing theory of why the dark side of the moon looks as it does and why the crust is 30 miles thicker is because scientists believe that at one time we may very well have had two moons, and that slowly over time, 100 years, thousands, millions, however many years, in chunks, one moon slowly crashed into the other, and it ultimately became one body. I tell you this story because it is my belief that we are in the midst professionally of seeing two bodies come together, and that is this world of planning and the world of public health. I've been very fortunate to be part of this discussion for the last decade plus, and it's a passion of mine, and I love to see where the planning profession is going and how planning is actually informing the world of public health. And that is really where we're going to be tonight and what we'll be discussing when it comes to the city of Eastvale. Normally, I don't take the time to introduce myself in presentations such as this. However, I felt that it would be necessary, given that even though I'm in Boise, Idaho, that you know a little bit more about me and who I am and what I'm about. First of all, as mentioned, I am a former California resident. And not only am I a former California resident, I lived about right there. I lived in the planned community of Creekside. I went to Grace Yoakley Middle School and Ontario High School. And out of high school, I actually went down to the Norco campus at RCC for the first year before I ended up going into the military. In the military, I got a chance to go all over the country and literally around the world, and had the distinction of having a Bahraini driver's license and spending time in Japan and the Middle East and so many other places. My experience has been pretty unique in a lot of ways. I've had the opportunities to work in communities all the way from Palmer, Alaska to Charleston, West Virginia, and numerous cities in between. And it's been a privilege to work in cities both small and large. I am a self-proclaimed health nut. I love to work out. I'm a runner. I'm a bicyclist. My former life as a personal trainer and coach has informed my view in terms of public health and what that means as a society and for our community. I'm definitely community driven. It's something that's also a passion of mine, serving my community as I did with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and in many other facets. I actually come from a police perspective. Though I'm not a member of the police department, I've worked with numerous police departments across our state and others. My stepdad growing up was a cop in the city of Compton in the 90s. I had relatives and best friends, dads, and a whole slew of folks who came from the world of law enforcement and certainly understand that world to some degree. And as mentioned, I'm a dad. I'm a dad to two young girls, one 7, one 4. And clearly their health, their mobility are paramount to me, and certainly inform my decisions and my perspectives as a practicing planner. And lastly, I am also a knower of dairy flies in the Santa Ana winds. Again, as I mentioned, if nothing else proves my allegiance to this area, it is these, right? I know what that world was like. and recall it fondly for the most part, right? Dairy flies maybe not so fondly, but my time was certainly formative, and I really enjoyed my youth in this neck of the woods before Eastvale was even Eastvale. So a little bit about who I am, because again, I think it is important to know. Gus mentioned this, but when it comes to planning, where does the city of Eastvale get its charter? Where does it get its permission, so to speak, and directive on how and why it should plan? Well, the state of California decided many years ago that this was a really good idea. And so you're embarking on a general plan update, right? And a pretty big one at that. You're doing so under some of the auspices of state law, and you can see some of the highlighted words. You're doing this because it's essential to the economy, environment, and general well-being. Well-being is a health term. It's also memorialized in the police powers of the U.S. Constitution. So your health, your well-being, your general welfare is all part of this notion of planning and this doctrine of planning. And also, so too is in California law, this notion of quality of life. It's also memorialized there. And we do so under these categories of water development, transportation, and all of the things that Gus mentioned and are required in our plan. So let's talk about that for a moment. Quality of life. This is a term that is tossed about quite a bit. We say it all the time. It's in our planning documents. It's certainly part of our lexicon. But what does this actually mean? What does it mean to you? Are there ways that we can universally define quality of life? When we talk amongst our relatives, our neighbors, our teachers, and our civil servants, are there common elements that they might bring up that might be some of our own? Is this attainable in Eastvale? Are the things that we seek actually achievable in your young city? If not, why not? This is where we need to get to. This is what we're shooting for, is to understand what is possible, and if not possible now, why not, and how do we make it possible? All because we're trying to chase and achieve this notion of quality of life. We used to plan and do things in a very different way. When we designed our cities many years ago, and in some cases a century ago or longer, we saw environments that maybe looked a lot like this. We had nice wide sidewalks, buffer spaces, and trees everywhere. We rode our bikes a lot more. Things changed, right? Maybe not as much, not given as much of the spaces as we once had, right? Our comfort level and our abilities to ride a bicycle around town may be a little bit diminished. We used to design our land uses similar to this. Why? Because walking was the dominant mode. Even riding a horse, which is the root of the origin of the word pedestrian, by the way. It comes from a notion of equestrian and pedestrian, and how and what we were designing our streets for, a little history there. But we designed our communities to look a little more vertical in many cases, because the proximity mattered when we were on our feet. Even the original Starbucks looked very different than some of our landscapes that look like today, which are very dramatic departures from what they used to look like. And lastly, even some of our civil and municipal services, such as our school system. This school happens to be in my neck of the woods in Boise. This is literally Boise High School, and you can see it's a smaller, more vertical campus, right? And I'll show you what other schools in our neck of the woods look like now. Liberty Park. This was a park that was built by the Olmsted family, who was the founders and designers of Central Park in New York City, a 20-acre park that was designed and implemented in Spokane, Washington. Well, you can see again on the upper right what we kind of look like now. We definitely designed our schools very differently, much more auto-centric, much less walking-centric. When it came to that park, as I mentioned, the last of that park is now 4 acres in Spokane, and what now runs through it is the interstate, I-90, that goes from Seattle all the way to the East Coast. So what are the results from some of these changes in planning and the perspectives and the ways that we've implemented some of these things? Well, we have some issues. Getting around by walking or bicycling is a lot more difficult. right? We end up doing things that maybe we don't want to do, which is if we want to walk, maybe not that easy of a choice. Maybe we end up driving because of our own desire for personal safety or the convenience of it, maybe distances and other things. But ultimately, what we have designed are systems that are just simply out of balance. So how do we get those things to be in balance? What are the things that are necessary to bring us back into harmony and be able to walk, bike, and drive to the places that we seek? It begins with an honest conversation. I strive to be honest when it comes to planning because I'm a firm believer that we have to start here. We have to be honest with ourselves for a number of reasons. We have to know what our motivations are. What do we truly want as a city, as a community body, as a private sector, as a public sector, and so forth, and what truly is our starting place and where we are. The next step, once we're honest, is we need to use our abnormal brain. Why? Because our normal brain has got us to where we are. It's time to start thinking about these things a little bit differently. If we don't change our perspective, then we'll never change our built environment. You are doing this. I know that you are doing this because I've prepared myself by looking at some of your documents and looking at your strategic plan in particular. You're using your abnormal brain. You are looking at all of your strengths and weaknesses, and you've identified a whole bunch of really wonderful things. You're being honest with yourself, and that is an incredibly powerful place to start. All of these things are what you, the citizenry of Eastvale, started off by identifying as strengths. One of these in particular caught my eye, and it's right here. Charter our own destiny as a young city. This is cause for celebration because this truly demonstrates that you as a citizenry, those who've participated in the process thus far, those of you who are on this webinar this evening, you are the doers of Eastvale who are trying to change and charter that destiny that you seek. So good for you for starting off with this, and I hope and I wish you nothing but the best. Also, by being honest, you've done this, and you have created a list of your weaknesses. And that's okay that there are a number of them. Every city has a number of weaknesses, right? And you've done a great job of articulating what those are and how later on we can start to identify the solutions to make the improvements to get these from weaknesses to strengths. When I look at this list, there are a number of things that jump out to me. When I look at some of these, in particular, those that are in red, what I see is common thread. The common topics that ultimately come down to one thing, and that is our transportation system. And some of these things might not be all that obvious to you as to how or why, but as we get through this discussion, I'll explain some of those and how these things do relate to our transportation system. Some of them are obvious, like the ones that specifically say large, fast streets or driving through Eastvale rather than to Eastvale. So your philosophy has been adopted. Your abnormal brain has kicked in, right? You've identified your strengths, you've identified your weaknesses, and now you've identified a philosophy. You've identified some of these things, right? We champion experiences that engage, excite, and elevate. Well, what is champion? Champion means promote, right? It means that we're going to do everything we can to make these good things happen more and more and more and create that sense of community, emphasis on unity. This is a great place to start. You've also identified how you're going to be doing these things. You're doing it through kindness, grit. All of these things are incredibly important. That last one is where I'm going to hit a little bit harder. Solutions driven. Solutions driven means that we have research, right? We have documented findings that have shown us the way that other places have done things that might get us to the same place that we want to get to and ultimately land where you want to, which is chartering that new fate and that new destination for a young city. So what does healthy look like? When we think about health, and think about public health and all of the images that might come to our mind, it might look like some of these things, right? Not all of us can do yoga on the beach. Certainly not all of us are professional athletes. Your former governor, there he is, flexing his big bicep a few years back. But these are more of the conventional images of healthy, the traditional ones that we often think about. But in a 21st century world, this is not necessarily the only thing that healthy looks like. These images here are also what healthy policy in particular might look like. In fact, most of these are the things that can be done every day in Eastvale, right? These are the things that are achievable and probably even start to illustrate what quality of life might look like to you, your family, and your neighbors. Riding a bike or driving down to a neighborhood cafe, right? Sitting outside. These are things that we relish and enjoy. Going for a bike ride with family in a green space such as this, right? A group of seniors going for a walk wherever they want to go. These are all ways that healthy can be achieved via policy. So if this is what healthy looks like and healthy policy look like, what does unhealthy look like? Ask yourself the question, where are places in Eastvale that I might think of as unhealthy, right? What are those places? What do they look like? And why? Why are they unhealthy to me? These might be some of the images that could conjure that up. I think back to my youth in the area and this poor young lady who has asthma. I remember the wall of smog that comes through and is seen in the San Bernardino Mountains every afternoon in summer. That's not necessarily an Eastvale issue, but it certainly is one that is unhealthy, right? But a number of these images might illustrate to us what unhealthy does in fact look like. So how do we avoid some of these things? What are the ways that we can, through policy and good planning, start to get ourselves a different future? One way is to start looking at our city through a different lens. One of the tools that I use all the time in the planning work that I do is this model called the 7 dimensions of health and wellness. Most of us think about the world of health as physical health. And I would grant us that that's probably the easiest one to talk about and what we'll be talking about mostly today. But there are a number of other dimensions that our cities need and us as people need in order to live a healthy life. Spiritual, social, economic, all of these things are the dimensions that are necessary for our city and our people to really truly thrive and be healthy. And in fact, some of these are going to again be explored and memorialized in your general plan in one way or another, whether it's a direct term such as this, like the economic health, or if it's more of a synonym or other word that we use to describe it. But I would encourage all of you on the call, all of the folks working hard in the city of Eastvale, to think about your city through this lens, this 7 dimension of health and wellness. So let's examine physical health, since it is the easier one to discuss when it comes to the notion of health and mobility. Well, we've known some new things, some things that we've examined. We've done a great job in our country of making us healthier in a lot of different ways. We lead the world in drug development and treatment development and therapies and physical therapies and on and on and on. But there's a real root and a real fundamental that our scientific and medical world is coming to a conclusion on. And that is that there's this idea of sitting is the new smoking. And guess what? The contrary to that is that walking is the secret sauce of this healthier, happier community. Part of this research came from right up the road. Up at Fontana at Kaiser Permanente, right? We have this wonder drug, as it's being referred to. And yeah, this is a bit tongue in cheek, but flat out, the research continues to just show us more and more and more that walking does so much for our body. It prevents diabetes, depression, on and on and on. Some of the greatest thinkers of the world were absolutely dedicated walkers. People like Leonardo da Vinci, Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein all walked regularly to inspire their brains before they needed to go and do any kind of deep thinking. And the Greeks were notorious as they would debate the issues and theories and so forth. They would do so by walking. But this whole notion of walking is called the wonder drug, right? It's the wonder drug for a reason. It does so much for us, and it really is what makes humans human. So how do we do this? What's the recipe for a walkable environment? How do we achieve that in Eastvale? One of the recipes and one of the ingredients, I should say, is proximity. Proximity absolutely matters. Research shows that especially within a mile, because a mile usually translates to about 20 minutes. That's a 3-mile-an-hour pace, right? If things are close to us within about that 20-minute mark or about a mile, we are much more willing to participate in walking than otherwise. This is particularly effective when it comes to recreation, and by the way. But all of these other things, school, shopping, work, all of these things really can be prominent if they are close. But this is but one of the ingredients, proximity. Let's examine that a little bit in Eastvale. We have a few land uses that I know are likely very desirable to the folks living in the city. The major shopping center in the northeast part of town. Well, let's look at what is proximate. We see the shopping center, and we can simply do a very rudimentary exercise by taking Google Earth and measuring out 1 mile. Now, when we look at 1 mile from this shopping center, what's walkable? What isn't walkable? So for any of the people who happen to live within that circle, is it automatic that this place is walkable? Not necessarily. First off, if we look to the east, we know that we have the interstate, and we only have one way for all of the people on the east side of that circle to get to the shopping center, one particular connection. What does that connection look like? How comforting is it? How safe might it be, right? And if it's not, if it's too busy, that whole third of that circle might as well be lopped off. What is it like to cross Limonite? For the people living right across the street of the shopping center, in close proximity, what is that situation? How do we get to walkability or a walkable environment if we're trying to get from that south side to the north? That's a question that we would want to ask and address. We can look at some of the other locations in Eastvale, the big high school and the other couple of schools that are right there on Scholar Way. Again, within a mile are a whole bunch of homes. So at least in theory, we have a fairly walkable distance. We have a pretty good amount of our rooftops are within that mile distance. But then again, what does it look like on Citrus, Scholar, Schleisman, and some of these other streets? If we don't get those things right, which we'll be talking about in a minute, then we're missing some of the ingredients for this overall recipe. Last one is the shopping center that's located on the western side of the city. And again, you sort of understand the point. This might be the most walkable destination, at least with respect to proximity, because probably close to 40% of the rooftops, maybe even 50%, are within that 1 mile sphere of this particular shopping center. A question that I like to ask the communities and the residents of the communities that I work in when we talk about this idea of health and mobility is really simple. This is a quality of life question that I ask of everybody. Can you walk from your home to the nearest park? It's a very simple question. Ponder that question for a moment and think about, can you do this? Is it possible in Eastvale from your home to be able to walk to the nearest park? This is a very complex question that sounds very, very simple. When I start to break this question down, I begin with the word can. Can has a lot of different meanings. Are we enabled by the law? Are we capable? Are we actually physically able to embark on an actual journey by foot, right? Do we even have that opportunity? In some cases, folks might not have any of these things. The question might sound simple because we think of it as first person, but you, represents everybody in the city of Eastvale, not just yourself, but your kids, older adults, and all of the folks who are on this list. I looked it up, and about 9, almost 10% of the city of Eastvale residents have some sort of a registered disability. Not all of them are ambulatory, but even cognitive disabilities are proving to be very challenging when it comes to the world of walkability. So think about that. Nearly 1 in 10 residents has some sort of an issue that needs to somehow be addressed when even we want to walk. Walking in and of itself, when I use the word walk, I'm not just referring to those of us who have the ability with our feet, but also those of us who are wheelchair users, who may be using a power scooter or some other form such as that. I sometimes will take liberties and actually take that word and think about it in other realms, like bicycling, even scooters and strollers. All of these types of things are sort of embodied in the word walk. So how do we have, or who has the ability within this word to get from our home to the nearest park? From our house, from our home. Our home means different things. For some of us, for a number of Eastvale residents, sure, it might mean a detached single-family home. But there are a number of other types of home environments within the city, and certainly in the future of the city of Eastvale. And some of these might look like that: apartments, motorhomes, and trailers, and other forms. So it's not just our own home. And then the last couple things is to, right? Unimpeded direct lines, gain access to, and so forth. And you get the idea. And then to the nearest park is, again, that notion of proximity, straight lines. Park is also a term that we can use to describe green spaces, trails, open space, and so forth. So that term park isn't just necessarily playgrounds and ball fields. So that question is very complex when we think about it. Do we have the ability to walk from our own home to the nearest park? And let me give you an example. These are the types of features that are available in a park that I'm going to show you in a moment in Salt Lake City. We have multiple tracks. We have cultural events. We have summer activities, right? We have an aviary. The overhead view of this park, you can see all sorts of things that are happening within the boundaries of this particular road. So this is Liberty Park in Salt Lake City. It is 1 mile long by a half mile wide, and you can see for yourself, it's an incredible place, right? It has a park, or it has a pond rather. It has all kinds of open green space, all of the tennis courts, on and on and on and on and on. Well, when we look at this from above, you also can see there are a number of homes that look onto the park from the other side of a street. And on 3 sides of this park, crossing the road to get to that park is pretty easy. However, a closer look at this stretch of road on the east side of this park, and you'll start to see this break down. So the question that I just asked, if I were to ask of these residents that same question, well, here's what they are faced with. Their homes are about 70 feet from edge of curb to edge of curb from this incredible facility. However, walking from their front door to that park is virtually impossible, because what we have put in front of their home is a 7-lane road. In fact, we have an elevated in this case, tree line median, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's generally used to keep people away from walking across the street. There is no crosswalk except for the very top and the very bottom of this 1 mile section. So for the very people who I'm asking this question of in this instance, the answer for a large part of them and for their neighbors who live behind them is no. So what do they end up doing? Oftentimes drive across the street to go then park in the parking lot to go to the park that they can see from their front porch. This is where that 9 out of 10 things, as my good friend likes to say, happens. We're missing that one last piece, that last rung of the ladder that gets us up to the top. This is what we have to address, examples such as this. So the question then asks of you, are there these sort of metaphorical walls in Eastvale? When I look at crash data, I've collected and saw the data that was combined for walking and bicycling, and the maps look like this. Not all of the crashes are represented with the dots, by the way, but nonetheless, this is about the best I was able to find. So in the last 5 years, that's what these maps depict. Walking crashes totaled 51, 2 of them unfortunately fatal, and you can see serious and so forth. In bicycling, 65 total crashes, no fatals and so forth. But I have news for you. Research shows that a good portion of the crashes that occur between walkers, bicyclists, and vehicles go unreported. In some cases, upwards of 25 to 40% of the crashes that take place are never even reported. In other cases, the report might not get filed because there might not be any sort of property damage that comes along with it. So these numbers could be misleading. But nonetheless, when we do look at these particular maps, are we able to find anything when we look at them? As a practicing planner, when I look at these maps, I see a few trends, and you probably do too. I would draw your attention to Scholar Way. Scholar Way, from the walking perspective as well as the bicycling perspective, show a number of crashes, right? We can see that in the walking realm, upwards of I think 6 or 7 just on the map itself, and then in the bicycling realm there are even more. So the answer to my question is, are there sort of some of these walls? Potentially we do have some of these walls. I would add the next thing to this discussion, the next ingredient, and that is this. Not only do we have crash data to show, we also can look at your own street system and look at the speeds that are on our roads. This is from one of your documents, and it shows the posted speed limits throughout all of the streets within Eastvale. Well, as you can see from the legend on the bottom, some of them are unknown. I'm guessing we can figure those out, but nonetheless, we have several 40, 45, 50, 55, and so forth. Well, every single one of these within the red circles is over at least 40 miles an hour or over. Why is that relevant? That is relevant because of this. The risk to people being injured, who especially are walking, but also bicycling, is exponentially higher at 40 miles an hour or more. In fact, at 40 miles an hour or more, you get into the 3/4, almost 100% certainty that there is a serious or fatal even result that would occur between any sort of a crash between a motorist and a walker and or a bicyclist. Part of that is, as you can see at the bottom part of this graphic, is this notion of the cone of vision. When we go faster, our vision starts to become more tunnelized. We have less ability to take in information and process it and react. Well, unfortunately, as I showed you a minute ago, a number of your arterials start off this way at 40 miles an hour or even greater. So as I mentioned to you a second ago, looking into that mirror, we need to be honest with ourselves. You know this is the interstate, right? This is I-15 just on the eastern boundary of Eastvale. What are we looking at? We're looking at 3-4 lanes of traffic, right? You know it well, many of you drive it every day. When I happened to look at the Google Earth Street View, there was a little construction going on, but you can see the speed limit at the time was 55 miles an hour. So we have interstate systems with 55 mile an hour moving traffic. Well, let's look at one of the streets in Eastvale. We have also basically 7 lanes of traffic. When we look closer, you can see 50 miles an hour of traffic, 50 miles an hour posted speed. A bicycle lane is on this particular street. It has a buffer, but how many folks are actually using it? They might not be using that because of what we're going to talk about in a minute, which is the notion of comfort. On our pedestrian realm, how many people do you see who actually go out and walk on a street marked with 50 mile an hour moving traffic? that starts to get into this idea again of comfort, which is a very critical element of what makes an environment walkable or bikeable. So this really is about, would you be willing to walk on the interstate? If so, you probably are going to be quite unique, but if not, you're probably the vast majority. Well, when you have 55-mile-an-hour moving traffic on the interstate and 50-mile-an-hour moving traffic in the Eastvale arterial, you can see where I'm going with this. This might be one of the ways that we start to think about that change of future. Think about how we might make ourselves what we're asking to be, which is more walkable or bikeable. Going back to this chart, as I showed you earlier, when I think about the weaknesses that you all identified, and using that abnormal brain, which is an incredible start, many of these things I showed you in red, in my professional opinion, start to come back to the notion of speed. You've already identified the very bottom one, which is driving through Eastvale rather than to Eastvale. Well, when we have interstate speeds on city arterials, that's a reason why. You've already identified, again, the large, fast streets and so forth creates challenges. It's even more than challenges, as I'll show you in a minute. But some of these other things, rising public safety costs, lack of dining options. Well, if we're going at 50 mile an hour traffic, it might be one of the reasons why some of the land use investments that we want aren't taking place in the city like we're hoping for. So I've hit this on the head already, but I'm really going to hit this now, and that is the notion of comfort. If our streets are not addressing comfort for the people who are walking or bicycling, we're missing the mark. We're going to be missing people from that system because we're not getting to this very critical piece. Proximity is one, comfort is another one. When I think of the word comfort, multiple words should come to mind, and some of these words are listed here. Ease, pleasure, calm, all of these things are part of what makes us comfortable. If these things are not met when we're walking on Archibald or Limonite, then chances are we're not going to walk there. Most importantly to note is that comfort is an emotion. It is an emotional response. And if we don't address the emotional side of it, then we're going to be short of where we want to be. And ultimately, it will lead us to this, which is fight or flight. If you are faced with a busy street, right, and it's not comfortable for you, are you going to fight that traffic? Are you going to try to cross that street? Or are you going to not? And maybe choose a different way of getting around, right? In this case, maybe feeling it's safer to take a vehicle instead. That's what ultimately results. Comfort is addressed through a number of design treatments. We have to get to all of these really, and that is human height, not just for kids, but also for folks who are, again, using wheelchairs. We have to get through height through things like maintenance and proper signage and things of this nature, and code enforcement. Width is critically important. We have folks who might have, again, disabilities of sight or chair, or even just groups. If we have an area where we expect more people to be by foot, then those spaces need to be wide enough to accommodate them. The image in the upper right is one of my very favorite images that I use in the work that we do, because this absolutely illustrates comfort. These kids, who in this case are likely walking to school, are getting as far away from the oncoming traffic, which they know to be a threat, as they possibly can. It's why there is a dirt path basically worn on the edge of that asphalt, right? This is that notion of comfort, and they are creating what's called a buffer space. And a buffer space is critical because it helps us to remove ourselves as far as we can from that threat. We need to think about the places that we want to be by foot, right? And what do those look like? In some cases, if we have the ability to move traffic around so that vehicles are maybe on the backside of a particular land use, great. If we don't, then we can figure that out as well, as we'll show momentarily. But all of these instances of land use and mobility planning need to be addressed to create those types of places that we want to be in the first place. In a residential setting, this also occurs, right? And in these instances, again, sort of buffers, we love to have our green spaces. Shade is absolutely essential. And having grown up in the area down there when it's 105, 110 in the summer, it can be brutal. And shade is absolutely essential for our comfort levels in the summer. Not only do we need to have things proximate because of that 20-minute distance and time, we also need to have shade and some of the ability to filter air and all the things that green spaces do. What do we avoid as humans? We avoid stale places. We avoid big parking lots. You're not likely going to walk across this parking lot. In many cases, what do? We park on one side, get in our car, go to the other side of the parking lot and park there, right? This is our habit. This is our human habit. And it's all across this country. It's certainly not just an Eastvale issue, that's for certain. But these are, again, the places that we tend to avoid. Lastly, other places, again, some of this is maintenance and stale locations and the such, but you get the gist. It's trying to make places interesting because as humans, we need them to be interesting or we miss the mark. When I looked at your strategic plan, changing subjects to a little bit now on the specifics of the design, this was most exciting to me because what I was able to see was that there is a task in your strategic plan that addresses this, and it's flat out saying, look to enhance roadway safety through design, right? How do we get there? This matters because why? Traffic fatalities are a leading cause of death. They are a top 10 cause of death in this country as well as around the world. For kids 0 to 14, you can see how we rank as it comes to compared to some of these other more industrial nations. We lead the way, unfortunately. And in fact, roadway deaths are the #1 cause of death for anybody really under the age of 25 in this country, but in this case it's also recently from 5 to 29. It's a real issue. In our country, fortunately, roadway deaths have started to come down, at least when it comes to vehicle involved crashes. Unfortunately, though, we are not coming down nearly as fast as other countries all over the globe. In fact, you can see one of the more recent and the better graphics that came out a few years ago. We are among the highest of industrialized nations when it comes to vehicle crash deaths. So we can be doing a better job. In other countries, as I showed you earlier, you were showing me in your strategic plan and in your sort of community philosophy, research-based, right? We're gonna use best practices. Well, in the Netherlands, they are taking that and have been for the last few decades to heart. Recently, and this is just fresh off the press, they have flat out changed their speed limits all over their communities in what they call their built up areas from 50 kilometers per hour to 30, which is about 18 miles per hour, which is pretty sweet. But nonetheless, they are doing this and have been doing this for quite some time. In their press release, and you can see this for yourself, they flat out say that even at 50 kilometers per hour, which again is 30 miles an hour vehicle speed, that the fatality rate of 20% is just too high for them to accept. So they want this to drop to 3% by making their speed limits 30 kilometers per hour because speed matters. One of the things I want to be very clear about is there is a distinct difference between speed and speeding. We often think of speeding as the specific problem. And indeed, speeding does get attributed to about 1/3 of the fatalities that occur in the United States. However, speeding is not the only issue here. And again, I want to make sure we are very clear on this. Speeding is a legal term. It's this notion, it's a statutory speed limit, right? It's exceeding the speed limit. But speed, as I showed you in that graphic earlier at 40 miles an hour and what the serious and fatal rate is all about it's a science term. It's the notion of our ability to measure how fast an object is going. So whether someone is speeding and exceeding a speed limit is almost irrelevant to the notion of speed in and of itself. This gets back to that idea again of comfort. It doesn't matter if someone is speeding or not. If it's too fast for someone's general comfort level, they're just not going to do it. So let's take a look briefly at what the public health realm does. They have recognized their own flaws. And what they've said is that we know what makes us healthy. We know what we need to invest in, and that's healthy behaviors, our environment, and so forth. But unfortunately, what we have been investing in is medical services, hospitals, and so forth. They've developed this notion of a health impact pyramid, where they basically have said, you know what, counseling and education has been what we've been doing for years and years and years. One-on-one consultation. You should eat this. Here's a water bottle. Go exercise, etc., etc. Versus what they need to be, which is down towards the bottom, which is the socioeconomic factors, which absolutely gets to a bigger audience. They've also said we need to go upstream. Instead of downstream, where we get to medical interventions, we need to get to the community impact by changing our strategy and keeping you out of the hospital rather than charging you, for example, for everything that you need when you get to the hospital. That's happening across our health systems from coast to coast as we speak. So when we take a look at this, how does this relate to traffic? How does this relate to mobility? Well, counseling and education, when we look at how we identify improvements and the design of our roads and how we enforce our streets and so forth, I would argue that enforcement is at the top of this pyramid. Why? Because we've already done it. Somebody's already violated what we don't want them to violate, in that case, going too fast or driving reckless or not paying attention on the cell phone or whatever the case may be. The problem with this being the only major way of improving conditions, that we have to catch them in the act. We have to spend incredible amounts of resources to get our police department out there all the time, or the technology all the time, in order to make this happen. What we should be thinking about and hopefully addressing is down here. How do we change the context to make individuals' default decisions the healthy ones? How do we make this the default all the time so that it's self-enforcing? We do that through design. This is just an example. I'm not suggesting in any shape or form that these are the specifics that Eastvale embark on, but these are at least some things that can be used for the next few slides. Things like speed humps in particular neighborhoods, chicanes that get drivers to slow down because they can't just go from point A to point B as fast as they generally want. Neighborhood traffic circles. The city of Seattle, for example, has, I think it's something like close to 1,000 of these things now, or at least several hundred all over. You don't need traffic signals in many cases, or even stop signs. The actual traffic circle works well to enforce the traffic speeds that we want. And in some cases, it looks something like this. Granted, this is up in Pullman, Washington, but this is a 4-lane street, right? But this is an environment very different because of all of the different features that we have put into place that get to that self-enforcing measure and ultimately gets to that level of comfort. Other examples, Z crossings that only have us cross a 4-lane or 5-lane, a 6-lane, whatever it is, a couple at a time is one of the different tools. Curb extensions that shorten that distance from one side of an intersection to the other. And those can be done in a multitude of ways, not just one size fits all. Changing the way that we design and lay out our streets. When the research was done on this, and this was done by several different universities, it's shown, contrary to what we might believe, the actual severity of injuries and fatality chances are much higher When we get into this design on the right, which is ultimately much more on the cul-de-sacs and circuitous routes than it is the more gridded pattern. Why? Because we force all of that traffic onto these busy roads, and we force even more traffic because it's not walkable to begin with. The distances become too great, and that distance matters, again, as I mentioned earlier with proximity. What do our engineering worlds say? Another treatment is crossings. Our crossings need to be more frequent. If we don't have frequent crossings, then ultimately we shouldn't be expecting people to walk to the quote unquote nearest crosswalk when in some cases those might be a quarter, half mile out of their route. And if those things start to happen, people cross the street in those straight lines. They then start to get criticized for jaywalking. That's a whole other term and whole other discussion. But ultimately, providing those safe crossings for walkers is one of the ingredients of a walkable environment. At intersections, if we make pedestrians wait too long when they're trying to walk across the street, then the research once again shows that the likelihood of non-compliance is very high. Ultimately, if they have to wait for more than a minute, chances are they're going to just go for it whenever they feel like they have the opportunity, because delay and time matters to us. So this is yet another one of those treatments at intersections that we can improve upon. And sort of getting towards the end, visibility is an incredibly important piece. We have to think about not just during the day, but also at night. Our crosswalks need to be striped in a way that it's visible to drivers, to help our drivers out, because a crosswalk really isn't necessarily as much for the pedestrian or walker as it is for the driver to be aware that this is where they ought to expect someone to cross the street. And we know that some of these designs are much better, more visible at different times of the day than some of the others. Also is probably one of the more important notes to make is that our crashes for pedestrians and walkers particularly happens at night, at dark time. We think about it during the day most of the time because that's mostly when we're up. However, we are becoming a 24-hour society, and our pedestrians and fatality rate amongst walkers is continuing to climb at night, more so than it is during the day. So we have to think about our city not just during light hours, but also at nighttime hours. So to conclude, I want to just hit on a couple of things. When we think about that quality of life, again, I would encourage us to define what that means. What are those elements that really get us to that quality of life that we're striving to achieve? Think about that quality of life through that 7 dimensions of health and wellness, as I mentioned earlier. What are we good at? What are we hitting and what are we missing? How do we make walking the easy choice? There are a lot of different things that we need to address in order for that to happen. But how do we balance our system so that if we want to drive, yes, we can still do that. No one's suggesting we take any of that away. But it does mean that we make our roadway systems more hospitable and comfortable for those choosing to walk. Right? What do we truly want? If we truly want to have a more walkable place, well, what does that actually imply? It might mean that we have to sacrifice some of the things that we've grown accustomed to. Maybe going from one side of the town as fast as we can now, maybe we do need to slow things down if that's what truly is necessary to become a more comfortable environment for us to walk, if that's what you want, right? And finally, what does success in Eastvale look like? I commend you for taking that early step of saying we want to charter our own future. Great. Now let's think about what the future looks like. And lastly, we have to be willing to give ourselves permission to try, right? If we conclude that we want to try some new things, do we give the city, do we give our private sector, do we give ourselves the permission to try some of these things out and give it an honest attempt to see how things change, or are we not? If we can get to these points, then we're going to have the success that we strive to achieve. Lastly, those of you who are on this call tonight, your friends or neighbors or loved ones, I'm going to ask you to be a little silly here, and I want you to think about this. I want you to be a crayon. What does that mean? It means that if you are working for the city, right? You have certain abilities, you have a certain shade. If you work in the private sector, you have a certain shade. If you are a voice and a resident, you have an ability to do certain things, right? You can volunteer, you can write a letter, you can do all sorts of things to be a really incredible voice for your community. But if you're blue, be the best darn blue that you possibly can. And if you're green, be the best green that you can. Why? Because all of these parts moving together and creating something beautiful matter. Ultimately, if we all can do our thing and play our part, we can create a much more livable and happier Eastvale in the future and ultimately achieve that quality of life that all of us have said that we want. And with that, I'm finished. Take some questions. And thank you for your time. It's been my pleasure to speak with folks from my own neck of the woods.
Okay. Can you hear me, Chris?
I can.
Yes, great. Well, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. I think we learned a lot. We certainly learned a lot. So I want to now open it up for, are you still showing? Let me see here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can have our up here. And if you can see that, so I wanted to open it up now for discussion and comments from and questions from the audience and from the attendees. If we have any attendees right now who would like to comment or ask questions of Chris, please go ahead and do so by letting us know in the chat box that you would like to do so. And then I'll have Miguel let me know if there's anyone who wants to do that, and then we'll get it going that way.
As of right now, there are no questions, Gus.
Okay, well, I can certainly kick it off myself. I do have a few questions that I wanted to throw at you, Chris, just to kind of get the discussion going. But I think, you know, Eastvale certainly is a unique city, but at the same time, there are a lot of other cities that have the same kind of challenges. And one of those is that, you know, certainly a lot of cities have been designed around the automobile, and you know, the notion of turning suburban cities into, you know, Manhattan or, you know, down to San Francisco or these other cities that we see, and we say, well, you know, that's really working there, or it's, you know, the density and what's happened over many years there has led to those environments, right? But for suburban areas like us, you know, it makes it a little more challenging. So, you know, as planners, we often make the mistake of labeling people as either drivers, cyclists, or walkers, when in fact many of us are all three, or would be given the choice. We also often dismiss the automobile as a choice, but the reality is that it is indeed the primary mode of transportation for pretty much all of us in suburban areas, and we must design our cities, in my opinion, with this in mind. Can you spend a little time on the importance of providing choices and how we can design our cities with where all modes of transportation are accommodated, including the automobile? So how do we do this with keeping in mind that we have to accommodate, you know, people being able to get to work and people being able to get to where they need to go in their cars, you know, before 100 years go by and we are, you know, finally dense enough to be able to accommodate some of those things that we see in other places.
So there are about 10 different questions within that one question. And I appreciate it. And so let me start by saying the number 3. And that number, since Alex Trebek just passed away, what is 3, right? 3, the question is, and the answer is the number of vehicles that I own. So in no way, shape, or form do I in any way sort of suggest or think that, you know, in a blink of an eye, we're all going to just stop driving or anything like that. Not at all. You know, driving is just as much of our fabric as anything else. The other part of the problem, however, is that we have created a culture where there's an expectation, frankly, that we are able to hop in a car, and as I've shown, drive basically interstate speeds or close to interstate speeds through our neighborhoods, right? Through our city. And for me as a planner, I know all of the pitfalls that come along with that. And where I would push back is I don't necessarily know that that is the type of a city that we're wanting to achieve, because for me, I think we're a little bit out of balance there. If we feel threatened by even just simply trying to walk, then we've got an issue. That doesn't mean that we don't drive. It doesn't mean that we don't accommodate drivers, but it does mean, should we take a step back and think, should we have an expectation that we be able to drive and particularly those speeds throughout, again, what could be school zones and other things? Is that what we're really wanting to be? I think that a lot of the answers have already been provided from the citizenry within the strategic plan by identifying those strengths and weaknesses, and saying maybe not. It doesn't mean that there aren't particular streets that are maybe a little bit faster than others or a little more accommodating or what have you, but it does mean maybe we do need to take a step back and think about how we're designing our particular transportation system if we're wanting to achieve that real multimodal, that's a planner term, forgive me, but type of a balanced system. And I can express to you this real succinctly, as best as I can be succinct anyway. You're about to embark on, I think, this Riverside Trail system, right? Where the city has received a pretty good fair amount of money, and people are going to go to that in a heartbeat. They're gonna love that environment because, in part, there's not a vehicle around, right? That threat is gone, and we love that as humans as much as we can. Now, the reality, as you've alluded to, is most of our streets are not going to be like that Riverside Trail. But we do need to think about how we can create that balance. One of the ways I would highly suggest the city get on right away is, for example, in your bicycle plan, there's an opportunity to update that real quickly by showing something what's called a side path. A side path is really nothing more than about a 10 to 12 foot wide pathway that aligns with a street, but does have a buffer space between the travelway and the pathway. It's not a sidewalk, it's wider than that, so it does accommodate people who are wanting to ride a bicycle, walking, running, whatever the case may be, but it does so on the same roadway, right-of-way footprint anyway, as the street. So we create that comfort level, we create that opportunity right in alignment with our other opportunity, in which case we want to drive. So there are ways that we can identify or we can improve and implement strategies without necessarily suggesting that, hey, we're not doing away with automobiles. That's not even a reality. It's not something I would even subscribe to. But there certainly are strategies that can be taken to get to our place that we're seeking.
Yes, and
we have a couple questions.
okay, great. So do we have a name and we can go ahead and speak?
First, I have Matt Olson. Matt, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you just unmute yourself, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I have a general question. I mean, when you talk about making roadways and we talk about doing all this infrastructure change, what have you seen done to actually get the people? I know you talked a little bit about education, but how do you, I guess, connect the city with what you're improving?
Oh man, I was with you, but you're breaking up. Can we repeat that maybe? Did anybody else catch the question? I heard the first half of it.
No, I didn't.
Maybe you can try again.
Matt, can you hear us?
Oh.
All right, Matt, I'm going to go ahead and mute you. If you would just please type in your question at the bottom in the question section. I have another question from Julie Rust. Julie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, good evening. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Chris for basically expressing just so well what I think a lot of Eastvale residents do feel. This notion of blending. Obviously, we're driving. Obviously, we are, we are commuters in the city. But this concept of the slowdown, and as a resident, what do you suggest residents should do? How do you start to have these conversations to the level where you're talking about, even like, examples where speed limits are changed and things like that? Because as a mom, we have 2 little ones, and we love being outdoors. We love being on bicycles, taking walks, but you can feel the wind of the car as you're, taking
Right.
your ride. And that doesn't, you talked about comfort. There is no sense of comfort. We're just
Yeah.
like watching the girls. We're trying to be like the block between them and the cars. And, what do you do?
Yeah, yeah. And what an unfortunate lost opportunity, right? Because what did you just describe? A bonding opportunity. Forget transportation for a minute. Forget, the physical health aspect of all of that. That bond of walking with our kids and having a discussion about life, right? And being able to do all of that social and emotional things that we strive for as parents or siblings or what have you. If we don't feel that notion of comfort, we've missed out even on that.
Right.
So the question, that's a great question. So like, where do we start, right? Part of it is we have to be, as I mentioned from the beginning, we have to be willing to give ourselves permission to try. So what do I mean? Can we start by identifying certain streets where maybe we're saying, you know what, this is just not worth it to be at this particular street. My instance, if I was starting, I'd look at that Scholar Way, because that's where our kids are. That's where our buses are. Typically, I know we're in the midst of all of this nonsense and stuff, unfortunately. But nonetheless, that's a place where I would probably look to start and think about, all right, what are some of the design treatments that we think are appropriate? We could start by flat out changing the speed limits. Now, there's going to be some time before people start to, understand that. We have to back that up with design. We cannot just put in and change our signs. That's not going to be the only way to get things to work. We have to be willing to actually put some meat behind that and change some of the designs of streets. And there are some specifics that can happen. Let me give you an example. And I'm not suggesting by any means that the traffic tool that I'm going to talk about is the way or a way even for Eastvale to adopt. But I had this happen to me here in the city of Caldwell, which is just east or just west of Boise, where they implemented a roundabout at a particular intersection. Initially, there's always a little pushback on that, but there's a lot of safety benefits that go, and the research is pretty ironclad about the benefits of it. When we were talking about this roundabout, I had 2 police officers in the back of the room raise their hands. They said, "Hey, we want to share something." Okay, go ahead. So they said, "We love that roundabout." Really? Tell me more. They said that intersection was one of the most dangerous intersections we had. When the roundabout went in, it solves all of that, and it allows us to be police. It allows us to go and actually do the enforcement aspects of our jobs that we really need and our citizenry are calling for, right? So again, the roundabout is part and parcel. My point is just that in this case, there was a tool that was implemented that worked, and it allowed the police department to not have to go to call after call, day after day of a dangerous intersection, and it worked for a number of different reasons. So there's a lot of strategies that can be used. There's paint that can be a low-hanging fruit to start with, signage that can start off with, and lighting, and some of those before we start to get to maybe some of the more complex types of solutions. But there are absolutely things that can be done to be that self-enforcement mechanism for our streets that get us to that level of comfort. I'm sorry you feel that way, by the way, man. I've been in a situation where, yeah, you walk on a street and you feel the rush of wind. Like, yeah, I can feel what you've described.
And it's pretty common. A lot of our streets are raceways, and
Yeah,
again,
yeah,
for the whole slowdown, because I feel like I mean, there's no need to be racing through the city unless you're really trying to get out of the city through it, not home safely.
Right. And let me add something to that, because you just made a thought come in my head. What we're shooting for a driver is time. It's not speed. That's a misnomer. When we think of what I mean by that is that, for example, if I have a 50-mile-an-hour road, but I have to hit a stoplight every so often, right? Well, that from one side to the other at 50 miles an hour, but having to stop, or traffic not circulating as well as it does, which, by the way, the research is flat out clear on this. 35 miles an hour is the most efficient way to move city traffic. That's the speed. It's sort of a magical speed because of the science. But my point is, it's a measure of time. So if I said, if it takes me 5 minutes to get from A to B in Eastvale at 50 miles an hour because of the stops, and if I said, well, if I go 35 miles an hour, but traffic flows better, and maybe I can actually synchronize signals, for example, right? Or maybe you do use a roundabout here and there, and you don't have to stop, and it still takes me 5 minutes to get from A to B. Well, now my measure of success is the exact same, right? But now I've also got the added benefit for pedestrian safety or walker safety or bicyclist safety, right? And now Julie's not feeling that breeze of wind going by her because she can go and walk when the traffic is maybe moving at a speed that's a little more humane, frankly, in our neighborhoods than what might be there now.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have another question from Josh Lee. Josh, if you could please unmute yourself. All right. Well, he wrote down his question, and I'll go ahead and read it off unless he unmutes himself. But it's one of the tools along with crash data analysis these days is level of traffic stress. What is your thoughts on it, and how do you think it will be helpful to use in our general plan process?
So what is being described is getting into the world of planning, definitely, in stress. The measure of stress is it specifically relates to bicycle facilities, but also it can be for pedestrians and walkers, but also even for drivers. There's different ways we can sort of measure that. When I'll hit one of those because it's kind of a complex question there. Bicyclists in particular. There's absolutely an abundance of evidence that suggests that if we don't design our bicycle facilities to meet that level of stress, then we're missing the mark. What do I mean? It means that we have defined certain types of bicyclists that in terms of their confidence level. Most of us aren't all that confident. We're kind of confident, maybe sort of. We're willing to, not on a 55-mile-an-hour road though. Maybe in our neighborhood street, maybe yes, but not necessarily on arterials. So if we design the facilities, for example, a standard bike lane, then we're only going to capture so many of those riders because we've missed the mark on that level of stress. That 4-inch, 6-inch, white stripe is not going to change the stress level very much. Whereas, for example, I mentioned earlier that side path concept where we're flat out detached from the travelway, right? We're buffered from the travelway. Maybe we've still slowed travel way down. Now our stress level has come way down. And because of that, that comfort, that emotion, right, has been met. And now all of a sudden, more people are willing to do it. More people are willing to participate. We'll see, maybe more teenagers, more youth, more elderly. We're seeing tricycles, for example, among the elderly population is exploding because they want to ride a bike, but because they might not be as able with given age, and certainly if they slip and fall and hit the pavement, it can be really harmful. Tricycles are happening, right? So how do we accommodate that? That level of stress has to be met, and it's not just for bicyclists. It is for our other ways of getting around.
Great, thank you very much. I do want to be mindful of our time, but I know that I want to make sure that everyone who has a question comment is able to do so. So if we go over, if everyone's okay with it, I'm okay with going over a little bit just to make sure that everyone's able to express themselves or ask questions. So Miguel, do we have any others?
I don't have any other questions, and I don't see Matt Olson on here anymore as an attendee. So I was going to try to go back to him to see what, so you can ask his question. So no new questions.
No new questions, and Matt is not back. Okay. Well, I mean, I know we're over a little bit, but I do have one more other question that I wanted to, get a little bit your insights on is, what opportunities do you see with Eastvale's existing built environment and natural features of land as it is now, and how do we capitalize on that to provide and improve on our alternative modes of mobility? So as it is right now, as you see Eastvale right now, you mentioned earlier about the trail coming along the river. We're next to a river where we have a compact city, even though it's newer and mostly suburban, but I think there's a lot in Eastvale in terms of just kind of the street system. You have kind of a graded larger arterial system, and the shopping centers in different areas. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts, especially you being familiar with the area. What are our assets that we can capitalize from those three areas that I talked about, like the built environment, the natural features, and the existing mixture of land uses out there?
Yeah. Three things come to my mind. Hopefully I can remember. I'm getting older. The first one is with respect to the river and the pathway. I would slap an overlay zone on that tomorrow. I would put a planning overlay zone near that river trail and think about how do we want the environments near and adjacent to that trail to be different. A number of places have done that and done it well, where they've done trail-oriented development. And so, for example, a building, how might that be different? Well, you might have an entrance, for example, to a new building that comes off of the trail, in addition to maybe the other side of the building, whereas right now maybe it's a single point entry, right? We have facade changes that are oriented towards the trail in and of itself. We have micro connections that absolutely have to come off of that river trail, because we could have the best river trail in the country, but if you can't get on and off of it very easily from existing neighborhoods, and you have to go in a circuitous route to get to it, or have to go to a busy arterial to get to it, it's never going to be successful. So all of those miniature minor things add up to a very successful river path, and those details matter. That, remember I told you about that Liberty Park, 9 out of 10 things right. We got to get as much as we can get, 10 out of 10. That's what we need. So that is an opportunity that the city has when it comes to this river trail. The other thing I was going to say, a couple of other things, is one of the things I actually thought, while the neighborhood and local street system isn't necessarily a traditional grid, it's never going to be per se, there are a fair amount of connections. The connections within the neighborhood streets and across are pretty good. So now it's about that middle point where they meet an arterial. How do we take advantage of that? Because if we can get that right, then I think we're going to have much more success of getting our circulation patterns better for local trips. So that's one of the things that people misunderstand, is that their cities, in most of the cases, 50%, 45, 50% of vehicle trips are within 2 miles of our home. 2 miles, think about that. So what we're saying is that half the time we take our car, it's because we don't want to necessarily go a different route by walking or biking for 2 miles. Well, gosh, think about that. We can take advantage of that if we make the system much more inviting for walking and biking, right? Then maybe we can reduce that a little bit, and maybe traffic gets better, right? Congestion gets a little bit better or something. So that's a second feature. The last thing I was going to say is, and this was listed flat out in your strategic plan, that one of the critical issues you're facing is a lack of developable land, right? You don't have much left. You can only annex so much. Maybe you have sensitive, green areas that you can't annex or something of that nature. But given that you don't have much land left, man, we got to get that right, because you're not going to get another opportunity. A shopping center or something that comes along is likely not going to be redeveloped for 40, 50 years or what have you. So we as a city, you as a city, have to really put your foot in the ground and say, is this application truly what this community wants? Are we getting that best use out of land? Recognizing that the developer has private property rights as well, right? So that's something that we have to nail. And this general plan that you're embarking on is exactly what that's for. Having served as a planning and zoning commission member for my own city in Boise here, I looked at our comprehensive plan, same as your general plan, all the time to make a decision on an application on whether I thought it was appropriate, or not. And so I encourage the city and the citizenry of Eastvale to participate, get their opinions known, and hopefully adopt a plan that can be used for the next 10, 15 years or more. And for those very, very valuable remaining pieces of property, get those things right as much as possible. So those are the top three things that come off of my mind.
Yes, thanks, Chris. It's certainly you hit the nail on the head. In my mind, it's certainly the general plan is where it starts. That's where us as planners, somebody comes in and wants to develop a piece of property, that's the first place we go to, is what does the general plan say, right? And then, of course, there's amendments that can be done and whatnot. And when you have an outdated plan, we don't have clear direction on what that should be, right? So this is here the opportunity to get it right and ensure that we're getting the highest and best use out of all of our limited land that's left in the city. So very well said. We do have one more question, I believe.
Okay.
A person,
right.
and they wrote the question, so Miguel's going to go ahead and read it out.
This is from Keith White, and he's asking about, he says, what about public transportation in Eastvale, like RTA? The question is about students getting to RCC right now, and our college students and kids can ride the RTA for free.
Okay, so I think
the first question was, what about public transportation in Eastvale?
Right. Okay, so public transportation. So I've done a lot in that realm too. We haven't talked about it too much in this particular discussion, but it absolutely is an important part, especially moving forward. I'm a believer in public transportation. I do think that our public transportation agencies, truth be told, need to modernize some of their approaches. I think that we're unfortunately still looking at transit in a way that is not keeping up with the times, and some of the transit authorities are doing a better job of the utilization of technology, for example, than maybe some of the others. I cannot at all speak for the transit that's occurring in Eastvale in that regard, so I can't say that. But I will say this is a huge pet peeve of mine, and that is that so often bus stops and crosswalks in particular, don't sort of coexist. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. If we have an expectation that people ride a bus, great. Okay, then we have to help them get to the bus stop. And if they cannot cross a road or can't cross in a limited distance, a reasonable distance, and by the way, I showed you what that distance really is. It's about 300 feet. That's about the distance that we know research shows. You're not going to go out of your way even beyond 300 feet, even at our best expectations, to go cross a street. People just don't do that. So if we can't help bus riders out by providing those frequent crossings, and specifically close or right at bus stops, we're missing the mark, and we're never going to have a high utilization rate of transit, and we'll constantly be looking at an empty bus wondering why, right? Because we're missing that one of those critical key components. The thing of it is that we have to remember is that bus riders are walkers and or bicyclists most of the time. 99% of the time, you get to a bus stop by either walking or taking a bike in all likelihood, right? So the journey begins using a different way of mobility, but ultimately we have to be thinking about the bus rider as an extension of the bicyclist or the pedestrian or the walker, right? So we have to be thinking about that system sort of holistically. And one more thing that I would add is that bus stops also tend to need to have a little more dignity. I cannot speak for the bus stops in Eastvale, but so often we just put a sign out there and call it good. Well, in the dead of summer when it's again 110 degrees or it's winter and raining, do we have bus shelters? Is it lit so that we can again increase and improve safety for bus riders when they get on or get off of a bus, right? The disabled community is a higher percentage of bus riders than not. So we have to think about the ADA aspect of mobility in this case when it comes to alighting a bus. So a lot of different elements go into a successful transit system beyond even just what the routes are doing, right? That's a whole other conversation of what the transit system looks like and how many transfers somebody has to make and all of that sort of thing. But that's critical. These other pieces are absolutely critical for the success of a transit system as well.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Chris. Is there any other questions or comments, Miguel? Do we have anything else? No. Okay, well, again, I do want to be mindful of people's times. So if there are no other questions, I think we can go ahead and close the session here with Mr. Danley and move on to just a couple of last minute things that I wanted to bring up. So anything else to add, Chris, that you wanted to mention or anything before we close it out?
I just want to, basically, again, just thank the city of Eastvale itself and all of you who've been involved in making this happen. It really is, when I first learned of this and was asked, it was incredibly flattering. And again, as being a person that lived a mile away or whatever the case may be from the northern boundary of Eastvale, a wonderful opportunity, and I've enjoyed doing the research and getting a chance to know what was not too far away from where I grew up. And again, it's been a delight. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank to everybody who attended this evening. I said it from the beginning, and I'll say it again: you're the doers of Eastvale. Take that and run with it. Right? You're doing a wonderful thing by attending this and the other events of this general plan, and keep it up. I can't wait to when normalcy comes around again and actually take a pilgrimage down to Eastvale itself and take a good look around in person and see what's changed and hopefully some really wonderful things. So again, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris, and we look forward to seeing you down here whenever you're down. Certainly look us up, and we're happy to go and take a walk or ride a bike if we can.
Sounds like a plan.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move on to just a couple more slides here that I just wanted to make a few announcements coming up. So we do have our next speaker coming up on Wednesday, December 2nd. This will be Mr. Victor Dover, who's with Dover Cole and Partner Town Planning, and he will be talking about community design. He's a renowned authority on town planning and urban design and planning in general. So we're looking forward to having him on December 2nd. So look for that, and we'll be sending out just like you got notice on this one. We'll be sending out a link where you can attend for that next speaker series, so next speaker session. And then in addition to that, just wanted to briefly mention our schedule and process and where we are. So we kicked this off in the spring of 2020, and I talked earlier in my presentation about some of the things that we've done already with the community champions and the Engage Eastvale website. So now we're clear into the Clear Vision speaker series, and we're going to power through those one a month basically for the next couple of months. We have 5 scheduled, but we're looking at adding a few more. I think now, once we get that done, at the beginning of the year, we will go ahead and kick off the draft of the general plan after we get our goals and policies and everything in order, and then on to the environmental piece, where we will look at the what kind of impacts we could have with the new plan and looking to see how we can mitigate some of those impacts as we go through the process. and then looking for adoption sometime towards the end of next year in the summer, or possibly in the fall for next year. So that is our schedule. And then coming up next is, let's see, that's one last slide I had here. So I wanted to just remind everyone that if you want to stay involved, please stay involved. To visit our Engage Eastvale ca.gov website for more information on this whole program, and then also on being able to provide comments. You can go ahead and leave comments there. Send us an email if you'd like to. Just give us our comments. Give us your comments any way you can. We're happy to take them, and we certainly need them. So I'm looking forward to that. And then you know, sign up as well for notifications on anything related to this project. And so with that, I think that is it. So again, I want to thank everyone for taking an hour or two out of your day to be with us today. We certainly appreciate it, and you know, we're looking forward to continuing to work with the community on this program, because I think it's a very important, possibly the most important program that we're embarking on in Eastvale. And so we want to make sure we get it right, and we get the vision right, and we get the goals and policies right. So it can't do that without input from the community. So we absolutely need it. It's critical. So with that, I want to go ahead and say good night to everyone, and thank you again for attending. We'll see you soon. I don't know if Gina or anyone else.
I was going to say just one quick thing. We will get a survey based upon.
Oh yes, thank you. Thank you.
And it will be available for you.
Yes, yes. So there'll be a survey that will go out to everybody who attended today, and that survey will go out sometime early next week. Please take a few minutes to fill that out, because again, it's critical that we get that information from you. So look for that. All right. Thank you very much, and have a good night.